topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for anyone who is tapping in from around the globe. Actually, I just got back from South America, which was incredible, and seeing the glaciers and just the mountains and the power of nature was unbelievable. And that's why one of the reasons why I'm excited to have my guest today, Zachary Ames. Zachary is a phenomenal leader. He has done many, many great things. And I guess the reference to the mountains is he's a fabulous downhill skier in the Wasatch Mountains in Utah, which I happen to love. And Zachary is also a global executive coach. He works with the Marshall Goldsmith Group. He's developed a local leadership program. He's worked with Bloomberg. He's just done some phenomenal stuff. And he continues to serve his clients, which is great. So with that, I'd like to invite Zachary on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, boy. Great. I can hear you now, Zachary.
Oh, let's try that one more time. How are you?
Uh-oh. Rebel, we can't hear Zachary.
Well, I can hear both of you. I can hear both of you.
Testing one more
No?
time, maybe?
Zachary, I can hear you. Linda, can you hear me?
Nothing?
No, I can hear you.
I can't hear Zachary. Zachary, say something.
Testing. Welcome.
I can't hear you at all.
No?
Well, okay. I guess we have to do what all good leaders do, which is improvise. So I'm going to ask you some questions, assuming everyone else can hear you, and I'm going to see what you had to say. What made you move to Wasatch, Utah? What made you go out there?
So it's not that big of a surprise. I do think many people wonder why or how I ended up here, but I was born and raised here. So that was not an unusual place for me to eventually land. But in terms of why I'm here now, after about 15 years in corporate leadership, talent development roles, about 10 years in New York, 4 years in Singapore, I was there, and part of what we're talking about with the great millennial career crisis. So I had been in my roles at Bloomberg, as you mentioned, for a minute. It took me all over and had a great opportunity while in Singapore to be a regional talent partner. And it was also mid-COVID. And so I left both my career back and as well as Asia, left the corporate side of things and decided to start my own practice of coaching and consulting. And came here, thought it would be a safe, soft landing mid-COVID. And what actually ended up happening was I have now a dog, a house, and as you noted, a ski pass.
So Zachary, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, what really drew you to leadership development and coaching? What was the real draw for you?
It's interesting. Many people in our field of work that both you and I do, someone will maybe rise through the ranks and come in sideways and realize later on that they were a great mentor, or maybe they were great at sales and came and did some sales training. My experience, I knew that this is the work I always wanted to do. I think that sits kind of in two spaces. One, from a younger age, I was doing leadership talent development, unaware that it was a career, and just loved going to junior leadership conferences. I was able to travel the country, and I'm very used to standing in a room with, 4 flip charts and markers, and just loved that world. And again, but didn't know that this was a thing I could eventually do over time. The other piece of it, in terms of why I've also dedicated my life to it, the more that I continued down the path and read those books, I was a total nerd, and as you can see, I'm surrounded by them. That was what I would ask for Christmas and birthdays was, Jim Collins' Good to Great. Pretty dense for a teenager, but that's what I thought was some fun literature. But I think for me, the through line has always been, when I think about it, there's been no great thing accomplished in this world without leadership. So for me, it's my ability to not just help individuals, which is highly rewarding, but also recognizing that my small little pebble in the lake is also wildly helpful in terms of the larger ripple effect that it can have in the world.
Wow. So what did you see are the biggest gaps in leaders that you found are sort of consistent across the board, or aren't there any?
I think there are plenty in some way, right? I think everyone, myself included, and knowing the career you've had, none of us are without some sort of gap, right? I think that is part of the beauty of the process of leadership and our growth and development throughout it. And that ability, I think, is what gives many of us our empathy to understand how to help and grow and develop others. I do think there are some unique challenges that are being faced right now within our current environment with the onslaught of things like AI and the massive or rapid, I guess, pace of technology changes, that sometimes the old rules no longer fit our modern environment. I think that's one of the bigger challenges, is the expectations of, again, each of the different generations coming into the workplace have looked different, and therefore the leadership requirements to help those behind them have had to look different as well. So I think there's a lot of things, and we could pick in, a number of them to deep dive. But yeah, I think everyone faces some unique challenges based on the current environment, and more importantly, their relationship to it.
Did you see any, I know you've worked in Singapore and I know you've worked in the US and, around the world, but do you see any major differences that come about as a result of either country culture or organizational culture?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one where we are getting, I think, more and more streamlined in terms of our access and capabilities with each other across the world, which in many ways is fantastic. And then I also really love the fact that there are some differences. One of the things I noted even for myself was needing to make some adjustments in my own communication style, coming from New York headquarters, where it was loud and bustling and very direct, and what's the next thing, and jump in and say your piece, right? And then Singapore in particular, but not hopefully too broad of a sweep, but across most of Asia, right? The style of communication is a little slower. It's a lot more listening. It's taking your turn. It's has different nuances to it, which were critical even for my own success, to make sure that during the day I approached my colleagues in a certain manner. And then when I would get on those late night phone calls back with my team in New York, I made sure I jumped in. That was one of my rules. In the first 2 to 3 minutes, I had to make sure my voice was heard on a call, because it would be easy to get lost in the background. And so that need and mix for approaching our styles and our cultures and our communities differently was vastly critical. And it was also really fun in my role to help teach other people how to be successful on that global stage. So what did it mean to speak up? What did it mean to fight for your ideas and your opinions? And even, quite frankly, sometimes how to be comfortable cutting somebody off.
So you know, you are a millennial. I mean, you say that. Do you find that any challenges for you when you're coaching older executives, or, has that been a challenge for you? And the
Uh,
second part of that question
yeah.
is, do you coach any other millennials or people that are younger? So two questions.
Yeah. So for those that are a bit older than me, I personally have not found it to be that big of a difference. I think the beauty of the container of coaching is it's not my job to give you answers. So if the question is, right, have I been in your shoes, or do I know your challenges, or what's the advice I would give? Quite often, that's not part of the agreement anyway. But I can say, what's coming to mind actually for one in particular individual is that was a lot of the initial idea of their coaching was they were concerned about how to work with and manage a younger generation, the needs and demands, and not wanting to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and feeling that younger generations might be a bit more sensitive, and was really open and receptive to certain perspectives. But what was interesting is by the end of that coaching engagement, that was his number one piece of feedback was, wow, I thought we were going to talk about this, and we talked about all these other things. And I think that goes back to this idea that, yes, we all might have some gaps in our leadership, but for most of us, right, I think leadership is really very, very similar and mostly the same. It's one of the things I used to joke with one of my old HR colleagues, right? That people are people. And as long as there are people in the workforce, you're going to need leadership, and there's going to be some of those challenges. And then, yes, I think I've also been really lucky in the sense of helping. I actually am about to just finish a 6-month coaching engagement with a fellow millennial, pivoting in their career as well. And really identifying, again, some of these big moments that they're tackling within this millennial career crisis of what do I do next? Here was what I thought was going to be, and I don't know how to manage certain things. So yeah, it's been a fun experience being able to help on both sides.
Wow. What do you think is, from your experience, is the secret sauce of great leadership? What is really that secret sauce?
Yeah. For me, I think there's two things I will comment on. The first is recognizing, again, as noted, that people are people. When you really stop and think about the best leader you've ever had, this is actually a fun exercise I will often do in groups, is talk about the best boss and the worst boss. And when we think about these great leaders, the list is rarely does it include great project management skills, delivered everything on time, we were under budget, right? That is not the things that people list. What they really say is that they were open, they were listening, they cared about me, they respected who I was, they were open to ideas, right? They themselves were a person, but more importantly, they recognized their team members as people and these human needs that we have. And then the second one I will note, from zooming out, not necessarily from their direct reports, but in terms of what the conditions and the environment are currently asking for. I've been doing a lot of work in adaptability, shifting away from the traditional change management, recognizing that things are constantly happening, constantly in change and in flux. And so the main characteristic we're seeing, and there's a lot of different research out there that's supporting this right now, is the idea of adaptability. That characteristic of, can I pivot? I got new information. How do we move forward? And that idea or concept, I think, has been quite revolutionary, especially in the face of what many are, considering this idea of burnout we're seeing in big numbers and stress. But a lot of that, again, is the condition, assuming we are going from X and now we're going to Y. And now we have, sub bullets and dot point O and all these things in between that X and the Y. And sometimes we decide, we don't want to go to Y. We're going to leapfrog and get to Z. So those two things, I think, would be the most important that I'm seeing consistently around what makes a great leader.
Yeah, I mean, you may have already answered this, but what do you think the biggest mistake Well, two parts to this question. What do you think is the biggest mistake that leaders make? And what do you think is the hardest thing that leaders have to do to change?
That is a very good and difficult question. Obviously, I think many of those things might be highly individualistic. That said, I do think quite often leaders can get in their own way, especially if they think they need to have all the answers. I think that is one of the most difficult transitions for a leader from that, not just from the high performing individual contributor into a management role. That's kind of that first step of the ladder. But even when you're in that middle ground, when you are in that player coach space and relying on that player component of delivering things, or assuming my team is stressed or frustrated, and so therefore I need to be able to give them the answers. It feels good to be wanted and needed, and it does not feel good to be vulnerable. And so oftentimes the idea of, if I have the answers, I'm going to be strong. And the reality is our best leaders often don't have the answers. That's why we need the leadership. We're going into unmarked territory. We're, climbing new heights. So yes, it's valuable and important that you've climbed the mountain before. You know how to transition that into the one we're going into. But it's okay if you haven't been on this exact one either, and to share that. But having the confidence to say, not just that I don't necessarily know, but here's how I think we can get there, or here's all the resources, and how do I manage the team and the time and everything else effectively to get us to accomplish that. So to the second part, then, what's difficult, or how do we make that change? For me, it's all around coachability. That idea that you can be open, that you can listen, that you can receive feedback. Ideally, you have a mentor, or maybe an internal coach, or even someone externally to help you look at those problems, understand, why is that important to me? Why might I have a challenge over here? And most importantly, again, even in some of that question mark or unknown space, how do I communicate effectively and get the team to really rally and trust around not only me, but the idea for us to move forward?
Wow. Wow. So tell me, Zachary, what do you think your personal secret sauce is?
I think it depends on a little bit of the conditions.
Oops.
I think when I'm in group format and setting, I have a bit of a higher pace. I think that's always been helpful, to have some energy. I also really believe in some pragmatism. One of the big changes I've had over my career was, as I mentioned, right, Jim Collins as a teenager, reading all the books and thinking that there's this really core philosophy or framework, or it needed to be, leadership was very academic for a while. And I learned that really leadership, again, is human. So there might be some academic principles, there might be some frameworks in the background that I'm considering or talking through. But where my real secret sauce comes is my ability to connect one-on-one, understand the individual in front of me, and really empathize and try to help then guide and shape or reframe some of the conditions or problems that are there. But by establishing that trust first, I'm able then to challenge the ideas or advise differently as we're moving forward.
Wow. So I know you called your organization the XYZ leadership. What's the story behind that? Why did you choose that?
It's a good question. It is short for expand your zone. So when I think of the idea and the philosophy that kind of came from it was, oftentimes someone will turn 40 and throw themselves out of a plane, or run a marathon, or do something big and different. But what I found as I was watching people do those things is it didn't translate back to their lives. They would go and do one big thing and then jump right back into that comfort zone, if you will. And the research, especially again, is noting around adaptability and future states and whatnot, that the more experiences we have, and if we can actually take that moment and apply the lessons learned from stepping out, and rather than just stepping back in, the idea is actually, how do I make that space bigger? How do I have more experiences to call upon, something that I call bright spots. When I work with a team, even, they call me in and say, Zach, I've got this problem. The team's not doing this or that. And I always stop and think to myself, well, they can't be in complete disarray. They're all still hired. The project might be stalled, but it doesn't mean it's off track completely. So I often will ask people, where is it working? What is the team doing well? What's a previous project that went well with this group of individuals? And that really gives us insight to the things that are not only in our control, but things we can focus on or work backwards and identify where some of the breakdowns have happened. And I find that even with my own self, I try to get similar to the old days of college, kind of spring and fall semesters, learn a new skill, keep my brain fresh in many of those ways as well. But it's also a great way to think about, not only for your team, but for yourself as a leader, is how do I go and acquire and get that space bigger? Which, and the last point on it is, I find that because when we go and hit up against that barrier, if it's larger, what used to be a barrier for me, or against my competition, what might be a barrier for them, is no longer the case. And I can move up against what that old line used to be with a lot more confidence and a lot more capability.
Wow. So question for you. When did you meet Marshall? I always ask everybody that because he's such a collector of great people.
He is indeed. And I was very lucky and fortunate. As you know, Dory Clark, I was in Singapore at the time and got a text from someone saying, hey, do you mind meeting Dory? She's got an idea for you. And it was the conversation between Dory and Marshall actually that led to this, of her saying, we want to build a pay it forward next gen leadership and coaching development program. So from that conversation, she was kind enough, and then I got time with Marshall. So that's now been almost over 4 years, I suppose, where I met with him and we talked about the potential for that future leaders program. And he said yes, or rather, I guess I said yes to him. It was his program, and helped build what's now called Forefront, which is the real premier leadership accelerator for coaches and folks in leadership and talent development.
Well, all the stuff you talk about and all the stuff we talk about in leadership, it all sounds so easy on the surface, doesn't it? But we're talking about behavior change, and we're talking about really being willing to be introspective about yourself and really face into the things that you may not personally recognize, or the things that you don't agree with, or the things that are really difficult for people. So how do you deal with that difficult individual that you can? I know Marshall says if somebody doesn't want to be coached, walk away, but how do you deal with that difficult person that can change but is really struggling?
Yeah, I think part of that, again, as noted, is some of that empathy and recognizing that there are days that I don't want to change, right? The ability to say that when we do some of this introspection, our little protectors, those defense mechanisms, come out pretty strong. They don't want to change. They don't want to be something different. They've worked really hard to keep us safe, to keep us successful. And so the idea that we have to change some of that it can be very tough. So I think on one hand, Marshall is correct, at least at the top of maybe a coaching engagement. I rarely go in and try to do any sort of fixes or turnarounds, or if HR thinks someone needs to be coached to be fixed, that's rarely going to be a successful engagement. But if the person can see that there's an opportunity, or I can see that little glimmer in their eye that they know this, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth some of that. And so I think one is a bit of empathy and recognizing that I've had this with other clients, or I've even had this with myself, is sometimes helpful for them to hear. And then really connecting to the larger why. If they understand that there is a payoff and a benefit to where they want to go, that is always a core foundation to our ability to then make behavior change happen. Right. And so if they, as a really simple thing, right, if someone wants to get that next promotion or whatever it is, and they recognize, wow, the way that I'm currently communicating with others I don't seem to have many allies, or wow, my team in the 360 feedback says I need to work on this or that. And it's like, okay, if you don't, what's the inevitable outcome? What is the end of that path? And most of them are able to articulate it. They just don't want to acknowledge that there is another route or another possibility. But once we uncover that and give them enough of a benefit to change, then it definitely doesn't make it smooth, but it definitely makes it easier.
I have kept a client or two a little too long, hoping that I could, eventually break through and make the change. And it never worked out. And I knew it right from the very beginning that I should have just, turned the other way, and I didn't. But, live and learn. What can I say? Live and learn. So tell me, Zach, what's next for you? And then I have my final question, which is 3 pieces of advice you have for everyone. But what's next for you?
So I think what's interesting as I start to look ahead, and the day that we're recording this is the Lunar New Year. The snake has shed its skin and the fire horse is on its way in. So I'm definitely feeling some of that momentum and missing my Singapore colleagues today, and tossing the noodles in the air and everything. I'm really excited for the opportunities that I have to continue with both my coaching and consulting clients. I'm also expanding into, speaking of expand your zone, adding in some keynote speaking, which I'm really excited about, particularly on this topic of adaptability as noted. And I'm also really excited by the reinvigoration of another opportunity and program that I have of PRISM Leadership, helping advance and accelerate the careers of LGBT individuals, recognizing that there's such a low representation the higher you get up in the chain. And so a few people have been able to go through that coaching process and program last year, and really excited for a group cohort in this year ahead.
And final, and you may have answered this already, but what's your biggest piece of advice to a leader?
I think the biggest piece of advice, I think I may have just subconsciously done it myself right there, is breathe. Take that second. Oftentimes we are moving so fast, we forget that opportunity that sometimes it's even just, 3, 5, maybe 30 seconds before a meeting, and just collecting your thoughts, or identifying and saying, okay, what does this person need from me? Or what's the most important component of today's agenda? Or whatever that moment is, that ability to slow down even in a micro moment really can help you be much more sustainable, help reduce that burnout, and more importantly, and ideally, help you move further faster.
Wow. Wow. Well, now you can see why I asked Zachary to join the show today. I mean, it just brilliant, brilliant advice. It was really great. Thank you so much, Zachary, for being part of the show. And I thank you for all the advice and all the insights that you've provided for people. And I hope you have are you going skiing today? Is it good out there?
The storm is just about to roll in, and we'll see if I can't cut a meeting or two and get up there.
Okay, so one final thing. How can people get a hold of you? Because clearly you're a kind of individual that executives should call into their organization.
I greatly appreciate that. It's been wonderful talking to you as well. You've definitely been a great mentor and someone I've looked up to for a long time. For those that want to get in touch with me, my website is ZacharyAmes.com or xyzleadership.xyz.
Great, great. Thank you, Zach. It was a pleasure, and I hope to see you soon. Are you
Likewise,
going to
take
New
care.
York for Marshall's birthday?
I think it should be in the agenda, yes. Yeah. All right.
Have a great rest of your day, and thank you so much. And we'll see you soon,
same to you. Thanks, Linda.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, thank you for joining another episode of Next. And we will continue to have some interesting people from whom you can get pretty good insights on how to develop your leadership practices, your own leadership style, and get insights into people that could help you become a better leader. Thanks, everybody. Bye.